1. Hey guys, welcome to Trinity Force Podcast. My name is Adam Ponophobia Cogswell, and I am your host for this evening. As you can see, I am joined by a great group of guys. We have a whole bunch of people here from Riot Games. We're going to get to you guys in just a second. Hold on there. I know how impatient you all look, just waiting. DeClaude is here.
Howdy.
Punch.
Hey.
Jira.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have the 3 amazing game designers from Riot Games coming to talk to us. Everybody knows Ghostcrawler.
Hello.
And we have Khoopa.
Hi.
And RoamingNumeral.
Hello.
I'm sorry, I still not going to use your name that you told me you changed it to, because for today's podcast, you exist as RoamingNumeral.
That is fine. That's my fault.
Right. So why don't you guys go ahead and tell us who you are, what you do for Riot Games before we get into any questions. Ghostcrawler, you can just say hi, I guess. Pretty much everyone knows who you are at this point.
I mean, titles are pretty weird at Riot. We don't place a huge emphasis on them, so we're all game designers. These 2 gentlemen are on our game systems team, and I kind of oversee a lot of game design overall. But feel free to talk.
Oh, sure, yeah. Like as far as my role on the game systems team, I'm more the design lead, but I'm still relatively new, so I'm trying to get the lay of the land, try to figure out how to actually add value and make good, smart design decisions. I'm going to make one right now and just point at this guy, because he talks a lot more than I do about these kinds of things.
Yeah. So I'm a game designer as well. My role is the somewhat fanciful product owner, which basically means that it's my job to make sure that stuff actually gets out the door with art and code that works, as well as design. So yeah, preseason was part of that effort, probably one of the bigger things that I've put together, and hopefully it's going okay. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see what happens after we get the feedback from here. If it's bad, I just won't send you over the podcast, and I won't tell you a lot is available. But there's been a lot of hype around preseason. Obviously, people are playing it now. They're finding all the crazy things that are overpowered or things that are going to carry them to get that really high elo. So how about you guys give us what you envisioned for Season 5, what you were looking to really do with Season 5. Obviously, the jungle changes being the big piece, but from a developer perspective, what did you want to change, or what just let's talk Season 5 a little bit.
Sure. From a developer perspective, actually, I think one of the biggest things, and we've said this over and over again, so people might get tired of it a bit, but anyway, one of the biggest things we were going for was giving ourselves many more levers that we could use to tune the game down, especially tuning at the level of strategies. So this is when split push is really strong because Shen is very strong, like 2 years ago, or more recently the version of that was Zed was really strong, so split push got strong. Do we have the ability to buff or nerf split push without hitting Shen or without hitting Zed? And we were looking to find as many places as we could that adding those levers would also result in some interesting gameplay and some cool new decisions for players, but also give us the ability to have more tools in our toolkit to nerf or buff strategies without touching champions. Now, just the endless caveat I have to put at the end of saying that every time, this does not mean we're going to stop nerfing or buffing champions.
Sorry, Warwick.
Right.
Yes.
Oh.
An example, I mean, let's be honest, yes, we all know Warwick is overpowered. That is not a secret. So there's a lot of that going on in a lot of different places. The items are that kind of thing. If elusive comps like you saw KT Bullets doing much earlier this year, like 6 months ago, where they just refuse to fight, rotated around the map, start getting really irritating. Maybe Righteous Glory is the way you want to go, and you end up with, we can buff up a hard engage item to try to deal with that without saying that any of the champions involved in their comps need to get hit, that kind of stuff. So that was a huge goal, and then the other one was just the standard diversity line. It's, we want to open up the game again to more competitively and high-end viable champions so that hopefully we get more and more types of comps showing up so that we can then foster that ecosystem using all the levers we've added.
Okay, I think that's something that's a lot of people have been looking for is, listening to you guys say that Warwick is overpowered, and yes, he's doing really well is funny because we were going to talk about some of those champions later on, but we will get to that point. So, I'm going to go ahead and let Punch take this next one. Punch, I'm putting you on the spot here. You've got a good question here about the designers, vision and everything.
All right. I don't. I remember reading this, but I don't remember which AMA it was. But at one point, the designers admitted there was a little bit too much vision, or that they felt like there was too much vision in the game at the moment. And so, with the addition of the Scuttle Crab and the wolves, we're wondering, is this a problem that's going to be addressed in the future? Does the new additions to the jungle add just go overboard in vision, or did the raptor camp help alleviate that? Is this just a case of you guys going to monitor this and you're going to see what happens and then address it in the future? So just overall, what are your ideas on vision right now?
So like the way that we're looking at vision right now, it's sort of like we want to take a more holistic view of like what vision does for the game. I think a lot of us can agree that vision's one of those things that it's hard to really appreciate until you get to like higher level of skill, and then it becomes like the Cold War of vision, putting down wards, putting in deep wards, spending some of the gold that you've snowballed into wards to enable you to create more vision for yourself, to create more strategies that are like hard to like see and sort of counter. Like that's just the thing that we want to take a look at, because you're right. You know, we have actually added a lot more sources of vision into the game with the Scuttle Crab. Was it Rift Crab now?
Rift Scuttler.
What is it? Oh, Rift Scuttler? I don't know what
Rift Crab. What?
There were like
Scuttler.
discussions on like what that crab was actually going to be called. But anyway, that's another thing. And then also with the spirit thing that comes out of the wolf, and like what kinds of effects does it have on the game? But like in addition to like looking at what the vision does to the game, like looking at like how are wards being used, like where are they being placed? How many wards does like a winning team place versus like a losing team? Like at the very very high end, like are wards like the only thing that like really determine which team is winning or not? Or is there a strong correlation between the two? Like do we want to make changes to like wards where like maybe it's that there's too many invisible wards and maybe we want to make more wards visible? Or like do we want to do things like wards last less long, or do you have like instead of like a limit of 3 wards, just 2 wards, or like going so far as to say like maybe there's like neutral areas on the map that you can sort of control that give vision, so that there's more like sort of interaction around vision. So that's some of the things that we're like looking into, but to sort of like dive deeper into the vision, like gameplay.
And another note on that too is we're looking at not only how you create vision, but how you destroy vision.
Right.
So how much of a vision advantage is that because you're stronger, you can afford to be in places to clear enemy wards? Is red trinket part of what's contributing to that snowball as opposed to cheap vision, or is it not that big a deal? Like a lot of these things we're gonna have to really dig into what happened. It's so interconnected with everything else in the game that we need to really dig into it. We don't want to make impulsive changes here because we've seen very sweeping changes come out of very like what were well-intentioned changes to the game.
Yeah, and well, like one of the things, like what's something that might look good as a like solution for vision in terms of like presenting it to players and like educating them like this is actually really important is like there's like maybe like some statistic that like esports can sort of draw, like they can press a button and now all the areas on the mini map that are revealed by like wards and stuff but per team is sort of outlined, so you can get a sense of like, oh, this team actually has like full vision over 75% of all the important objectives in the game. And that's really important because, X, Y, and Z. And that like actually might encompass like some of the stuff we've added to preseason, like the Rift
Scuttler.
Crab thing. Yeah.
Scuttle Crab.
Yeah, Scuttle Crab thing. And the Wolf Spirit.
So I noticed going out of top lane, for example, that's primarily the role I play, that I am routinely picking up 1 pink, 3 greens, and I'm sitting on my sweeper, whatever. And we're talking about 15 minutes in the game. So at any point in time, I have control over one area of the map. But with how large the Summoner's Rift is and how little vision you can control with one person is that something you guys are looking into for 3 months? Is actually potentially reducing the wards? I know you mentioned it maybe going down 2 could be something, but with how large the map is, are you removing too much from a team by reducing vision in that chance?
Right. So what you don't want to have happen, what a bad solution would be, that there's so little vision that everyone just opts into super conservative gameplay, and like, you know, we'll put down a vision by the areas that like where I'm most vulnerable, that I can be flanked, and then I'm just like kind of waiting for the minions to come by, and then I last hit them very passively. Like that's what would not be good. So we're, you know, that's why like, you know, having neutral sort of vision objectives, such as like the crab and the ghost wolf, and potentially other, like the spirit thing from the wolf, potentially other like other methods to get vision might make it more interactive.
I think interactive is actually a really good word on that. Like, a lot of it is maybe we don't want to, maybe reducing vision uptime would be a way we could go. So yes, you could get vision of the areas you need, but you don't necessarily get to just passively hold it. Or again, some of the, like when I was saying about reduction in ability to clear it, or at least the specialized ability to clear it, if vision was more contentious on the map and less the domain of whichever team happens to be in the lead right now, correct, that would help a lot. We're actually, I think the biggest concern with vision and how much of it there is in the game is just how much does it contribute to snowball.
Right.
Right. I know the Scuttle Crab, I've been messing around, and I actually like to bait some enemies to get the Scuttle Crab. Know they have that false sense of security, and then they won't ward inside the pit, and then sneak that dragon objective solo, things like that. So I like the diversity it adds there. Just it's a neat little strategy that I've been having fun with until people wise up, of course. But, you know, regardless, they're still going to have to buy another ward to throw into the pit because you made it vision outside the pit, and you can't tell if somebody's doing that objective anyway. So,
well, speaking of the Scuttle Crab, are there any concerns for having uncontrollable or uncontestable, I should say, vision on the map? Does anything come with like pro play? You know, somebody has complete and total control of the Scuttle Crab. Now you always know when a dragon is going to happen. And at this point, I'd say dragon is more advantageous for a team than Baron is right now. When you get free, you get free vision control. That, in my opinion, that brings a little bit, you know, that marks like it's like a concern, like a red flag.
So it's just really quick touching on the Baron versus Dragon. That's the most interesting, or one of the more interesting discussions I've seen a lot, because it seems very polarizing. Like, I'll see threads where new Dragon is totally pointless. Why would anybody bother with it? Go push towers or go focus on farming.
So silly. Don't get me started. Anyway, sorry.
or perspective. So Dragon is super, super important, so focus on Dragon. One very common thing is actually, I think a lot of people are undervaluing how powerful the tier 3 buff is. That 5% move speed is actually really strong.
Oh, yes.
Moving on to the indestructible vision, that kind of thing. We need to watch it. We ran pro player tests before we released it. We flew a bunch of pros in from all over the world. We had a separate one in China to get Chinese pro feedback as well. And there was some concern over the crab. So actually, even the release version now has lower uptime than the pros tested when they were here.
Okay.
So at that point, it was 90 seconds. It's now down to 70. And it was partly that where we want to make sure that to actually take advantage of the Rift Scuttler, you actually need to decide when you're going to take it. If you take it when there's no realistic chance of a dragon fight happening, and you mess up when that thing is up or down, nobody will get that vision. You can sort of make that decision, right? Of, oh, I don't want anybody to have this, so I'm going to take it early. But if you want it for your team, you actually need to keep the enemy team off of it. Some of the higher level internal playtests, like if you guys watched the preseason rundown where Jat was talking about playtesting it internally with Kobe and some others, we had relatively high level internal playtests where there was decisions being made about protecting it because one team would want it at a certain time. So I think the counterplay instead of is more about deciding when and how it is taken rather than once it is taken. So there may be some interesting things where indestructible vision just doesn't end up being something good for the game, but I think we need to let it play out for a lot longer before we can decide exactly how something it is.
I agree.
But if those strategies, though, going back to some of the stuff that we had said, like trying to make the vision game a little bit more interactive, if the appreciable value of getting, like, killing a crab and getting the vision is something that, like, you have to min-max based off of, like, a team-based strategy on when you kill it and protecting it, that might be too difficult for players to sort of wrap their head around. We might change up the model completely and make it something that has relatively, for instance, like, has more uptime, but the enemy team can sort of interact with it. And like by interacting, it probably just means destroying it. But the act of destroying it is revealing your position on the map. So.
Right. I don't know if you would be able to answer this, but do you know if there's any rhyme or reason to how the Scuttle Crab moves when you're attacking it? Is it completely...
Everything about like you mean
is it completely random? Like, because sometimes I'll notice he'll like kind of walk toward the enemy team as I'm killing him. Like he walks like he doesn't walk up and down the river. He starts walking toward like the bushes and stuff. And it's I guess maybe just completely random. But I didn't know if there was any rhyme or reason to how he moves.
It's not completely random. It's designed specifically to be evasive and unpredictable. It is not as deterministic as that. And how he behaves once the entire map's worth of champions are in the river gets very chaotic.
Okay.
Because we were trying to discourage a little bit the style of jungling of, I just go do my rotation and hit all my camps, and didn't want the crab just to be, stop 3 along that journey, but to be a little more in the moment of like, is it a safe time to grab him? What if he runs away? What if he kites me into a place I don't want to be?
Well, I'd even say there are times when I've killed the crab that as soon as I start attacking, it'll run like straight towards the enemy team, and like a perfect time for me to not. I shouldn't be there at that time, and you have to back off because you would die otherwise, which is kind of cool. But it puts way more thought into than just I should kill this camp because it's beneficial.
Right.
Yeah, so because he doesn't attack, the risk needs to be, is he going to pull you somewhere you don't want to go?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because it's not that we wanted to add a random thing in the river that had no risk to take. That's not why we made him not attack. We were looking for a different risk paradigm that can actually test some different decision making for players.
Yeah, I've noticed, just to end that Scuttle Crab conversation, is trying to take him as a solo laner or even taking him with your duo, that he ends up pulling you quite a bit away from your lane, and in a disadvantageous position for you. So you can't push somebody to a tower, take the crab, come back, and now you
gotta work
control
for it
the
a little
river.
bit.
So you have to work for it, which is nice. I like that piece.
That's your Syndra, and you toss him in your lane.
We talked about that a little bit on the patch rundown. It can be the wrong decision to chase down the crab because that's time you're not working on a tower or farming gold. You're just chasing a crab around for vision you may not even need at that moment.
Well, since we're down in the bottom lane talking at the moment, let's talk a little bit about Dragon, because Dragon did get changed, and I think that's a fantastic conversation to have now that it's 5 buffs right now to totally get the Dragon. So if you do that, the timer, the 6-minute timer, it's roughly about 30 minutes to get every single buff if you're on it. Exactly. You've gotten it every time it comes right back up. So how did the design team come up with the number 5, why we are doing the buffs, why we're no longer giving gold? Can you give us kind of a rundown of what's behind the Dragon before we get into the specifics of it?
Yeah, sure. So that framework actually came down. So to answer the reason number 5, I'll just straight up say for a long time in development, it was 6. And we pulled data and looked at how often would that even come close to happening, and it was vanishingly small.
Sure.
So we cut 1 buff out of it. I mean, yes, it's 30 minutes if you control every dragon on time. It's 32.5 minutes, assuming you can kill it instantly and you control it on time all the time. And so we looked at how often that one team would manage to collect 5 dragons, and 5 dragons was about 1 to 2% of games, depending on what level of play you're looking at. And of course, now that we've changed it, that may skew, but that was the sort of starting point we had to work with, was just how often. And so we were like, okay, cool, that will work for that. We also wanted it to be a long-term play, so getting it down to the 3 or 4 buffs was getting way too small. Going to the buffs was actually much more about trying to make it a less comparable objective to towers. We wanted a realistic scenario where, depending on what your strategy and your overall goal in the game was, you might want to opt for towers rather than dragon, as opposed to just both teams wanting to go with whichever one was kind of tuned to be the most valuable at any given time for all comps, because gold is sort of a universal scaling step. Like, if I give you a pile of gold, you can scale with it. The other reason we went buffs rather than just sort of varying levels of gold was because the way items work in our game is you can use gold to hit an item breakpoint. So finish your Bloodthirster, finish your Blade of the Rune King slightly before your lane opponent, and try to use that to ram it down their throat and kill them. Right. Whereas the dragon buffs, even if numerically they are worth more gold, you can never leverage them into that same huge item premium you get for completing a tier 3, tier 4 item, depending on which item you're talking about. So by doing that, we actually create a world where we can control the curve of power much more smoothly, and then also it's less comparable. You can't do the same things with Dragon as you can with Gold, and we made sure that there are buffs on Dragon that you can't buy with Gold.
Yeah,
Okay.
and sort of to add to that as well, like we were changing the reward structure on Dragon from Gold to buffs because we wanted to make the decision between like taking like a tower and taking Dragon to not be apples, to be more less comparable. So like, you would take top tower and get the same reward as taking Dragon. Now taking Dragon is actually giving you something very different.
Now, can't you argue, though, that getting, for example, the very first buff with the 8% AD and AP is comparable to taking a tower when you start looking at a scaling point based on, you could have an anti-siege comp that stops the team. The team got that extra gold early, they got that extra damage, but isn't 8% AD and AP pretty much equal to the 150 gold you get from the tower?
So in terms, my instinct is actually the gold value is probably slightly higher if you were to convert it into raw gold, but that 8% AD and AP will not give me additional map pressure or map control, which taking the tower will.
Right.
And it will not ever allow me to say, oh, cool, I got that, therefore I've got my Blade of the Ruined King and the active that comes with that before the enemy laner does. So towers and gold are probably more of a snowball objective than Dragon is now, or at least they have the potential to be that. If the 8% AD and AP are too high and it's leading to greater snowball than the item breakpoints off a tower are, obviously it's a tuning point. We can set those values to whatever we need to, or even in really drastic scenarios, although I haven't seen anything yet that leads me to believe we're here, we could just change that buff.
Okay.
Also wanted to have like diversity in sort of objective taking. Like there are scenarios that are going to vary from game to game. So like, trying to, if you have Dragon up and Baron up, and this could be like your 4th Dragon or your 3rd Dragon, that's probably a lot more desirable to take than if it was like your 2nd Dragon. So you can sort of focus team strategies around that too. And we think like that's one of the ways to keep League of Legends sort of like feel different from game to game, because it's really hard to predict like when Dragon kills, what number of Dragon kills my team's going to have versus the enemy team, and like what that actually means from game to game.
Right. I like that. I like that you can see the buff on your enemies, so you can say, oh man, this is going to be their 3rd Dragon. We really need to contest this, guys.
Right.
We can't just let them get it.
Stop that.
Yeah, see, that's why I say at this point, in my opinion, if you were to make it to the end of the game, we're 30 minutes into the game, and that person's about to get that last dragon buff, you should be contesting that point, because I've seen a Victor, for example, a 4-item Victor, 6-shot at mid-tower, having the 5 dragon buff. Like, the insane amount of stats that you get, for AD, AP, damage to towers, damage to minions, whatever it may be, is more valuable than propping up your minions to siege a turret. So I'm really interested to see how it goes forward. And now, when I was kind of asking you earlier about that towers and stuff, I kind of like to play devil's advocate. Like, we're on the podcast, we like to talk a lot about how you should open up you should get mid turret as soon as you can, because it opens up the map. Like, completely opens it up, allows you to roam and do stuff. But at the same time, I'm really curious if taking a bottom turret is going to be worth it over taking Dragon, because you now have the timer, and you also are able to continually stack that buff. And like you said, buff number 3, the move speed, is huge. It's probably more valuable than some of the other pieces that are on there. So, but that leads me into my question of, I've seen some talk about how like buffs 2 and 4, if I remember correctly, people are saying they're not valuable. I don't understand why you would get it, why you even get it past number 1, because of buffs 2 and 4. Are we going to see any point as we're watching this, maybe in the next 3-4 months, that you guys or Riot in general says maybe we should swap what buffs people get at certain points around?
Have we socialized the change
So I think on that, so basically what we're looking at is there's a very specific structure to those buffs. Players are are correct in identifying sort of which buffs are a little bit lackluster. That series of buffs is very explicitly not meant to just get better and better and better as you go over them. The reason tier 1 is a bit spikier than the number 2 is we want to give players still a good reason to contest an early dragon. Like, is there a reason to try for a risky 3-minute dragon? That buff needs to be worth quite a bit for that risk to happen. So there's a reason that the first buff is kind of spiky. The 3rd buff is later in the game because it's so much more impactful. And we don't feel like you can it's harder to resist a snowball of dragon if there's sort of this smooth curve between 1 and 3. If you look at the power budget we had to put on dragon at the various phases, if it was a smooth line between those, we kept getting a problem of, well, the first buff isn't even really worth contesting early, so we'll just take first dragon whenever we kind of can. It doesn't matter. It's not a goal. Or we had to bring tier 3 down enough that it didn't feel as impactful, because in a lot of games, tier 3 is going to be that's my dragon advantage buff. We wanted that to be a very meaningful buff. So 2 kind of shared its power budget with 1 and 3 a little bit. So yeah, 2 is a little bit lower in the dip. And 4 as well, we wanted to make sure that 4 was bringing out sort of a pacing buff, where it's like, if you are leveraging that properly, the damage to towers and structures is actually non-trivial. You were mentioning what Victor can do when he has that pushing, or if I'm running a split push strat, it gives me a reason to go for it. And then obviously, tier 4 donated some of its value, and then 5 just goes crazy, and tier 5 is a huge amount of value. So those are very specifically tuned in that way. So, but the payoff is in tier 3 and tier 5. So even though tier 2 may not be as appealing in and of itself, you're never going to get tier 3 unless you take the effort and risk to get tier 2. So I think that it's sort of a long-winded answer to that, but I think players have correctly identified what was a design goal in the overall structuring of the buff power.
No, I don't think it was a long-winded answer. I think that's like the perfect answer that people needed to hear. It's one of those, like you said, you need a reason to contest dragon, and at what point do you decide that stop them from the 5%, or excuse me, is it 15% movement speed?
5% move speed.
5%.
I made a very ill-guided change internally. For a while, it was 10, and it was pretty crazy.
Oh, I can imagine.
That'd be great.
I said 5. This is 2.
Yeah,
So.
that was on yeah, we did. So it was on PvE, so we can talk about the tier 5 used to be much stronger. It used to be triple instead of double, and 250 true instead of 150.
So you just want the games to end when they got the 5th buff? Is that what it was? Like, you got the 5th buff and the game's over?
So, I mean,
That's actually
okay with that.
I'm kind of fine with that, yeah.
So, like, tier 5, so it's interesting. The only, I know numerically this is very not true, but the only game that I personally know of that had a tier 5 dragon, the team that got T5 dragon actually lost.
Wow.
I don't know how.
Wow.
I won a game on
honestly,
Saturday because I got the tier 5 dragon. Like, we got all 5. We were losing every team fight at that point, got that, and we won. Like, that completely turned everything on its face.
Well, and I was going to say...
What's your game time? I'm totally doing game research right now.
I'd have to go look. It's in my match history. I could look it up. It was probably like 36, 37 minutes, maybe a little bit.
Okay,
yeah, because that's something that, like, we're very interested in, like, seeing like what the dragon kill distribution is. Like, what we don't want to have happen is like players feeling like if they fall behind 3-0 in dragons, that the game is. We're very sensitive to that. We want to make sure that there actually still is like a reasonable chance to come back.
I've seen. We don't want it to be the case that you're dominating, you've taken out all the enemy towers, you're knocking on their base, then they go sneak 5 buffs and you lose. And you're like, what the hell?
Right. I was gonna say I've seen a lot more like junglers on teams that are losing be way more aggressive to try and get like last second smites off on dragon now because of that. And in a way, if your team isn't prepping for dragon well, I'm almost okay with being completely punished by the enemy team having a 5-man buff if we weren't able to stop them from taking the first 4 anyway.
So you're touching on the edges of one of the reasons why we're totally, like, you were talking about dragon versus baron.
Right.
Overall value throughout the course of the game, I think that's still very undecided, undetermined. We'll have to see over the course of probably months before we really get to see what that is. But in terms of tier 5 dragon versus 1 baron buff, I'm actually totally okay if T5 dragon is worth more. Because I can smite steal a baron buff and instantly get that power from my team.
Right.
If I smite steal your tier 5 dragon, cool, I denied you that power, but that's probably my tier 2 or 3 dragon that I just got. And so the risk reward is actually pretty appropriate there. It would really be very awkward if it's like, oh, I smite steal this, and now I've got T5 dragon, GG.
Well, and that with the countermeasures put in place with the team who has the whenever you get more dragons, you're taking more damage if you're the team that's attacking. Again, like that incentivizes people to go in and smite steal, make big plays, try to get out, sort of even the playing field. That if you can pull that off, you're the hero of your team too. Like, so it's a feel good feeling as well.
Let's talk smite stealing then, because this brings on to the next question. Right now, dragon is now considered an epic monster. Is it epic or legendary? I don't remember what I covered.
Sounds right.
Something like that.
So, it's now classified like an epic monster, and it can be tanked. Essentially, I'm using air quotes here, tanked. You turn it away from your team now, so it doesn't do the AoE damage, and you can stand in the middle of the pit tanking it. But that kind of gives it an advantage to, unintentionally positioning on that or epic monster gives an advantage to the person smite stealing. And really, what we've been saying forever, you have the advantage if you're trying to steal it. Was that something that was thought about when we talked, the tanking dragon, essentially? Was that something that was looked into, or was that considered like counterplay? I know my question's a little jumbled, but really I'm kind of worried about how blue side advantage here.
Steal because like the mechanics of the dragon fight make it so that the positioning is more predictable.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because if I stand in the pit and I am a Mumu standing behind the dragon with my back facing blue side, I've unintentionally given blue side an advantage because now my sonic wave doesn't have to go as far to hit somebody.
You can steal a full dragon and tank it somewhere else.
Sure.
To be honest, it's not a thing that I have thought about a lot, so I'm hesitant to comment too deeply on it. My instinct, I'm wondering how much of this is players need, and for including me, need to figure out where to put it to help deal with that.
Right.
But overall, stealing is a really interesting high impact moment when it's done well. There has always been counterplay to stealing in terms of ward coverage or team positioning or that kind of thing. So as long as those opportunities still exist and there's some agency for the team who is trying to take dragon against the theft potential, I think it's probably okay. If we saw like some bizarro world where smite steals were successful 75% of the time, then we'd probably have to look at it.
Well, what about I guess this probably comes down to players having to understand that you have to, I'm going to use again, say tank the dragon or move him away and point him away from people, because so many people are used to kind of grouping up or standing as far back as they can, and now people have to position themselves in potentially disadvantageous positions, excuse me, that bring you closer to openings that players can come in and stop you from doing the dragon. So. What I'm really curious about here, though, is moving on. We've seen Zyra, and I want to say Heimerdinger can do it too. The dragon can be tanked by the plants. I'm sure you guys are aware of that.
Yep.
Is that something that you guys are looking into?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different variants of this. Like Pantheon can solo tank it very, very easily using his block. Fiora takes a little bit more effort, but she can dodge in and out and pretty much Dark Souls encounter it and come out and somehow basically make it.
I like that description.
There's overall, it's an area we're aware of. It depends how many champions can do it and how many answers are available. It comes down very much to, if these are just niche strengths of these champions and they become relatively well telegraphed and enemies can deal with, hey, we're going to ward a little bit better against these champions, or hey, we understand. Like the Fiora one is actually my favorite one of this because it takes quite a bit of skill with Fiora to do, otherwise you die. And even if you do it well, you end up very, very low. So passing Lee Sin just jumps onto the dragon, punches you in the face, and finishes the work for you. And so there's actually some risk associated with it. So it depends on what is involved in the attempt, and that, I guess that's my answer. It depends what's involved and how abusive the overall strategy becomes. If it's just a thing that these champions are really cool because they can do this and there's appropriate answers available, it's probably not so toxic. If it's these champions can do it and it's so advantageous that they're just perma-pick ban quality, or even that is the only reason they're interesting at all, again, we probably need to look at it.
On the flip side, like, we can always take a look at the dragon encounter itself, sort of see, like, does this look like a good dragon design? So, like, sort of bridging the gap between the two concepts, you can look at the dragons and actually change that up, or you can look at the individual champion tactics, but both of them inform the other, and that's actually where, like, the community at large has actually been extremely helpful in helping us sort of figure out like what is actually good for the game. But at the same time, it's like this is actually freaking cool. So
Okay.
The interesting thing ultimately about both Dragon and Baron isn't the PvE part of the game. It's what, taking one of those, what that means to the other team, and do they have an opportunity to counter or steal, or that's the fun part.
Okay. I know we're spending a lot of time on epic monsters, but we're going to move on to Baron here real quick because obviously the Baron buff has been completely changed. It now empowers it powers allied minions as you stand next to them, and in a sense, this kind of encourages split pushing, and that's something. Well, for the podcast, we've been telling people don't do that often, or if you do it, under certain circumstances. Do you feel adding these items or adding Baron like that encourages a form of split pushing or encourages a form of way of playing the game?
So one of the main reasons why we changed the Baron buff to remove the regeneration and add the pushing power is that the soft sieging qualities of regeneration were actually the goals of that particular bonus. In terms of like creating like gameplay that's more obvious, it's more like empowering, just feels mighty. In making your minions sort of like you are now like the siege commander, and you're making them super actually push down the lanes more powerfully. That was definitely the goal of that change. And split pushing was definitely something that we wanted to sort of maintain when we were discussing the types of bonuses that Baron could give. Like there was actually, and this is like, this will sort of illustrate some of the design process, but also inform as to why we wanted split pushing. Like it was kicked around like, why don't you have the Baron buff like sort of like stack up? So like the more Baron buffs that you have near minions, they actually are more powerful. And we were talking about it as a team, where we're like, no, we actually kind of like the idea of having like split pushing as a strategy, because like it's actually inherently more risky. So like, if you have like 3 guys pushing down the middle and 2 guys on the flanks, like the vulnerability is the enemy team can kind of go like just all in and sort of like raffle stomp you. So that is actually something that we were intending as a possibility.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's also like the removal of the regen unlocks a lot of that too. Because imagine a crazy world where we added the minion buffs but left the regen in place.
Right.
That 1-3-1 becomes, holy crap, yes, that's what we're going to do. Because if they come in and actually try to engage on the 3, they try to get out. If they took half their health and damage, it doesn't matter because they've got 1% missing health regen, or 1% total health regen, and they're just going to wander back into the fight 20 seconds later, like on the next wave. So a huge amount of it was removing the regen increases the risk of any action you take when you have Baron. Because if you get poked off your wave, if you lose a team fight, if you get basically harassed down or otherwise engaged on, you're actually going to be punished for that. Whereas before it was, oh, we ate a Nidalee Spear, well, I guess that guy stands in the back for 1 minion wave and then we keep going. It didn't matter that much. And what we saw that largely leading to was 3 minutes of whoever has Baron buff gets to go do a bunch of stuff, and the correct play for the enemy team is to do as little as possible.
Wait it
and
out,
so
yeah.
We wanted to remove some of that while leaving Baron as feeling like, as considering it's single objective, single reward, it's still the premier buff in the game. Like that is the premier reward we have in the game, so it is meant to be very, very strong.
Unless you have 5 dragons.
Yeah, well, that's
Right.
fine.
Well, I was going to say at 2 dragons, though, when you 2 dragons, 15% minion damage, remember correctly. Or is that 4? I can't. Sorry.
No, the minion damage is tier 2.
Okay. Yeah. But when you have the 15% minion damage at that point in the game, is it powerful enough? Again, I haven't played too much, so I'm asking you guys. Is it powerful enough to negate the effects of having that Baron?
I don't think so. So much of the Baron power, like the melee minions get incredibly tanky. Range minions aren't as tanky, but their range increases slightly. So a lot of champions lose their ability to simultaneously clear the melees in the range, which actually makes a huge difference because now it's taking you 2 or 3 spells just to get coverage on the minions. And cannons outranging towers basically say if they're protecting that cannon minion and it's dealing AoE damage to your towers and your minions, you're going to push really hard.
There's an inevitability to that siege quality that the minion buff, the Baron buff, gives to cannon minions that is unlike anything else in the game. It's completely binary in its relationship by design.
Yeah, and so you're basically forced into action upon it. You can't just passively wave clear safely.
Okay. Sean, I'm going to let you go ahead and we'll move over into jungle changes.
All right. So with all the sweeping changes that have been made to the jungle, with internal testing or whatever, did you guys envision sustained junglers having such an immediate impact? Junglers such as, you know, Nunu, Warwick, anybody who can kind of deal with the hard-hitting early game minions and still swing about with pretty strong power when they hit 6.
Yeah, so I think we knew that sustain was going to be more valuable than it was.
Okay.
We were not unaware that Warwick was going to be strong. I think we're a little surprised at how strong. But overall, I mean, it wasn't like we were sitting around being like, yeah, Warwick's never going to be picked. Like we had some idea that Warwick was going to be around. Nunu, obviously, just in terms of the increased reward in terms of opportunity when you counter jungler, when you control objectives now. The fact that he can basically just smite Nom the crab and take it. Like, we knew Nunu had some stuff to bring to the game. Fiddle was another one. There's been interesting discussions about Elise being inadvertently nerfed by the new dragon encounter, but overall, actually, we thought Elise was pretty good again.
I agree with that. Elise is my most played champ, and I would definitely say this brought her up just because it brought a lot of... My other part of this question was, were some of the planning along with this, like, in term with rescinding power from a lot of the common top-tier picks as well, so there was more diversity?
Right, that was definitely... So in order to add diversity back to the game,
okay.
talking about a more broader strategy, like, we felt like, you know... a lot of like team strategies were limited by the types of junglers that you could bring into the game. Because that pool was so small, you would always pick suboptimal jungle champions for a team comp that would otherwise not enjoy having Lee Sin on their team. But it's so great, you know, you might as well have him. So like to answer your question broadly, yes, we actually wanted to increase the number of jungle styles in the game. And sustain was definitely something that, you know, going back to Ryan's point a lot earlier about adding a lot of like levers into the game and allowing us the freedom to just tune the items themselves rather than the champions, that's something that we can do. I believe we're looking very carefully at Ranger's Trailblazer and going like, this might be a little too powerful, and then we can safely tweak that knob without affecting, like, say, oh, let's just nerf a Mumu's Tantrum E just because, like, he's just a little too powerful. Like, we now know at a more sort of like a higher zoom level, like, this is actually sort of like, this is doing what we want, but a little bit too much. And now we have the right tools to sort of affect it.
Right.
So on the topic of levers, how about we just, I would just like a real world example here right off the bat. What would you say the problem with Warwick is right now? Is it that Warwick himself is too strong, or is it the Skirmisher saber that's
right?
That's applying that debuff to the enemy that's making him his ult strong?
Warwick is, I mean, for something to be this out of line, a couple of things are acting in concert. It's not that it's so. Warwick might be a bit too strong. Like, he may get a bit of a tap in the next patch or two, but I think the majority of it is the synergy he has with on-hit effects, and the fact that he just loves everything about Skirmishers with Devourer on it. So I think, like, the fact that Skirmishers is basically, when you build Devourer on it, is multiplying in and of itself, because you're getting more on-hits because of Devourers, so that it's got self-synergy there. And then Warwick's ult basically says, I get all of the on-hits while you do nothing.
Yep.
So
in a very short period of time.
Yeah, so I think you're basically seeing just convergence of many synergies, which is probably the most corporate thing I've ever said in my life. But
so you just list them out, like this low counterplay.
And there's a lot of compounding factors.
Wow, the buzzwords are real.
Yeah, so I think, anyway, just a lot of stuff coming together and ultimately doing 1,500 damage in the duration of one ult.
He's also did not mention that the Warwicks are using Blade of the Rune King, which is also another part of the on-hit as well.
Yeah.
Like, another way to look at it too, in addition to adding the levers, and I keep saying levers, but like knobs, which is, I guess, more designery of me. Like, you could conceive of a world where Skirmisher Saber is less about hitting the enemy player as often as possible with your basic attack, and more about, like, connecting with them, so that you can reduce the compounding effects of Warwick's ult.
Yeah, or even just the self-multiplication between Skirmishers and Devourer.
Correct.
As long as those two are like synergistic with each other, and they're actually multiplicative scaling within the one item and its enchant, that's probably going to lead to scary cases. Like, to deal with that, we probably need to nerf both up and down at the same time, or always optimize Devourer and Skirmishers, assuming they're built together. So there's some stuff there where we need to look at breaking that apart a little bit. We're still figuring out exactly what that'll look like.
Yeah, and we're looking at that first before we look at Warwick. Although, I mean, you could make an argument. Anyone could make an argument that Warwick himself might need to be looked at, because you look at the champion, he's got like, you know, target click abilities and like very like sort of like patterns. So like that's something, that's a totally different discussion, but within the realm of things that that we're looking at.
Now, could it be something where, sorry to cut you off, but it could be something where with Skirmishers that you have an internal cooldown on the item where it can only proc a couple times and needs to wait? Is that something we could look at in the future or has been discussed?
That idea, I think we're looking in slightly different directions. Internal cooldowns tend to be a little bit hard to really parse out. They tend to be pretty counter to the fantasy of an on-hit item. So that example would achieve what we're looking at doing. We're probably going to go about it a slightly different way, though.
Okay.
Also because, like, the debuff that you're trying to take advantage of from the Skirmisher Saber, the window of opportunity is, like, compressed into when you use Smite. So you kind of want something, like, you're already burning a cooldown to get access to this mechanic, and now it's got an internal cooldown, and it gets a little rules lawyering that we want to sort of avoid whenever possible. So
that I was going to mention, because I played Warwick a couple times with it, and you gotta use that smite on the enemy champion to get that bonus. You know, you won't have it for that objective.
Well, I was every game that I've played him, I will hold smite just to smite other people for that reason.
Smite Timo.
Yep.
Yeah. So we definitely wanted that to be one of the choices. Like, if you're taking the more sort of aggressive anti-champion variants of smite, it should be at a cost to some degree of objective control. And whether that, and so we need to figure out, and right now, actually, I'm pretty happy with how that choice is being made overall, but we need to see what, you're going to hear me say this a lot. It's been out for like a week. There's going to be a lot of, let's wait and see. Let's see how things are going. I think overall, we're pretty confident in the structures that we've created. And then there's just a lot of tuning and a lot of learning. And I put this in one of the dev blogs where we tested the hell out of this stuff. Like, we've been playing various versions of this stuff for months internally, and I did the envelope math, and it's into the hundreds of thousands of times the hours in the first week that players will put into it than we could. So it's like, okay, I guess at that point, like, we will inevitably learn things just by watching what happens in the next couple of weeks.
And I also want to reiterate that part of what we're trying to do is get back to a place where players feel rewarded for experimentation. I think we all felt the last couple seasons that once players find something kind of outside of the box, Riot's going to smack them down for doing it. So we still need to keep the game balanced. We don't want to see Warwick as 100% pick ban, but we also don't want to immediately overreact to, oh, they're doing something we didn't expect, that must be bad.
Right.
So I guess the version of that, like, an example of that is Pantheon and Dragon, right? It's like players are showing us that this new Dragon, there's a way you can play around it with Pantheon. Like, we don't want it to be like, oh, we didn't expect that. Bong. Like, we want to look at this and say,
I love Pantheon.
All right, cool. Something new has happened in the game. We've learned something about how the game can be played, and we need to evaluate it. And it may even, the decisions might get nuanced. Pantheon being able to do it with no effort whatsoever, maybe not okay. Fiora having to take a bunch of skill and actually being risky, maybe that's fine. Or maybe they're both okay, or maybe they're both not okay. We need to see. We want to watch it. We want to see how players react to it.
Like, we don't want to flatten the experience too much. We don't want, like, Dragon to just be, here's a big ball of stats, and it's just going to attack you, and you're going to attack it, and then at some point, you know, Dragon's going to die. You know, we want there to actually be, wherever possible, to add in little, like, nuanced design that makes sense. So Dragon breathing fire and blocking it at the right time, that's really, really cool. In fact, if anything, we should try to play that up and make that a bigger deal that champions could play around.
Yeah, in fact, I'll go as far as to say that if your listeners take home like one message from this podcast is we really want good, cool stories to kind of come out of the game. It's a huge success if, you know, tomorrow someone calls up their bud and says, dude, I had this great game last night. Let me tell you what happened. We just feel like that wasn't happening enough last season. Like, games kind of played out the same. So we want to see, like, oh, they almost had 5 stacks of dragon and we shut them down. Or, oh, it came down to this one fight at this laser turret. I mean, the cool stories is what this is all about.
I felt that way when I discovered the Pantheon soloing dragon thing. I really felt it was a cool story. I hit Twitter. I'm like, man, it's great. Let him get Scuttle Crab, and I'll ult on the dragon pit, and I'll solo that dragon again. It felt so good to do that, and I was wearing the Dragon Slayer skin, so it was appropriate. Come on, things like that. Felt really good.
I actually had a question in my head that I actually wanted to ask you guys. Well, first of all, I was going to say, you guys were talking about how we need to give time for people to play this game, and I think it's a really good message more people need to listen to. Ghostcrawler, you might remember from the last time that we spoke with you, we talked about Rengar and how it took the community, 2 months to jump on the new Rengar terrain. Yeah. And I think there's going to be quite a number of junglers or items that are going to be picked up here in the new patches, or people valuing that 5% move speed over not valuing it anymore. Just need to give people time to play it through. Sean, I think you were talking about some junglers like Zach earlier,
right?
For example, right?
Yeah, I could see like Cho making a comeback, or Zach, and that just has to go with the sustain changes. But I think a lot of that also has to do with the jungle just feels way busier than it's been in a really long time. And the fact that not only are you having to micromanage the fact that the monster camps are they're on a longer respawn time, or that you can only use smite every 60 seconds and you can plan your build around that. But in a way, I feel like there's way more pressure, and I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, like on junglers. Again, bringing it back up to that like stealing dragon sort of thing. Now it's kind of like all the pressure in the world was on somebody who has the enemy team bearing down on them to smite the dragon. But now on that team that's behind, when the more powerful team is taking that dragon, all the pressure in the world is on that guy on his team to go in and maybe sacrifice himself to steal the dragon and maybe turn the game around off. Hey, we finished, our 4th or 3rd or 5th or whatever buff for it. I see way more diversity coming out of the jungle, but I also feel like in a way the jungle just got so much more complicated compared to a lot of the other roles. Whereas like in top lane, for the most part, you're up there doing your thing, trying to out CS, outplay whoever. But in the jungle, you have to micromanage everything that you're doing. You can't just walk into the enemy jungle and be like, oh, their wraiths are down. They probably in this area, or raptors or whatever you want to call it now. They're in this area, so you can go and you kind of know, oh, they're not in mid. They're probably ganking top. You have to micromanage what the enemy jungler is doing, even though you don't know if vision or otherwise.
I guess a question for you guys, with all that micromanage that Sean is talking about, everything you have to do out of the jungle. I've noticed that games are getting longer, especially from the 20-minute 4-man push down a tower, roam around, like you said, KT bullets kind of roaming around. Was that ever a concern with the length of the game and how everything that you've added into it is going to affect it? Players maybe waiting out dragons?
So, yeah, we were conscious of like their not somewhat related to the jungle, but somewhat not. Like the idea that the game just felt like longer. That like I think like the most direct change that players felt was there is a strategy, whether or not it's real or not, of stalling for more dragons, or like, hey, we don't want to push because their towers have now shields and lasers, and there's even more lasers. And when you think about like the amount of defense that we've added in the game, and you like translate it all down into like boil it down into that element, and then you compare that to the offensive punch that we've added, we've actually like perhaps like added too much defense, so players don't feel like they can push as hard. And it's something like when you think about like the dragon bonuses, like maybe like the bonus damage to minions at 2, maybe that's not correct at 2 because it actually like it helps like stall the game out longer because the defensive team will actually get more benefit out of it versus like the offensive team because they're killing the minions anyway. So like it's like little things like that. Like there's going to be a lot of little tweaks that we're going to sort of like that we're going to be aware of that we can change like in the future to sort of help push the games. But I also think like, to be honest, like we see this like with new preseasons all the time that like people are still trying to figure out the game. Yeah. Like sort of like the jungle has been reimagined. Like the gameplay is now very different, and like even the junglers themselves are trying to figure out like what's the path that we should take as a team, because they're generally like sort of like the team strategists, as it were. Like they're the ones sort of like guiding everybody to the objectives, and if they don't actually have like, if they're still trying to figure everything out, games I think will be a little bit like slower.
So like two things here. One, like game length is thankfully one of like the easiest things we can monitor. That is very easy for us to pull aggregate game data globally on, is the game getting longer?
It's not a goal to make the game longer.
Yeah, so that's the TLDR here. We're not looking to make the game longer, and it's very easy to tell if we have, and then start digging into why and start addressing it. So if the game actually is getting longer, if that's what is happening globally, we can address it. And then touching back on the jungler thing, the jungle definitely did get more complex. There's more there to think about. And one of the big reasons there was if you look at how many moments of mastery, how many moments where a jungler can do something really, really awesome in the game, we wanted to increase that. Because, let's be honest, Season 2014, taking wolves, not a skill test.
Right.
Even now, I would argue that it's not really a skill test. The decision of whether to take wolves might be a skill test, but you stand there, I mean,
decision of whether or not you blow your smite or save it.
Like if you look at any pro jungler, half the time they'll just be mashing Q while looking at bot lane. They're not even paying attention to wolves.
Right.
Like, so that isn't a skill test. In Season 2014, there was some decision making, where to gank, who to gank, and then there was mechanical execution in ganking, and that was pretty much the skill profile of a lot of what the jungler had for most levels of play. Jungling got incredibly complex toward the higher end, like not trying to take away from that.
And it is a concern, like, if we end up driving players away from jungle, if jungle's like the really scary role because there's so much pressure, that could be a problem, and that may be something we have to address.
And though I do think there is going to be way more pressure. I will say you guys have done a great job because there are more. I almost always jungle because a lot of people didn't usually want to do that in the past. And this week, I think out of like the past 10 games I've played, I've got to jungle twice because everybody's like really excited.
That's really good to hear. Because I mean, like, I guess the end is we pretty deeply believe that part of what makes a role satisfying is basically how often does the game tell you you're doing a good job.
Right.
Like if you're a laner, like if you're a top laner, every single time you last hit a minion, the game's like, you did good.
Right.
And that enough, you get to go back and you buy a freaking huge item and that feels good, or you get a good trade and that feels great. Like it's all about those mastery loops and tying those in and being like, how often can you test something, learn something, and achieve something in the game? And jungling in Season 2014 certainly had that. I mean, getting off a huge gank, and I think this is one of the reasons Lee Sin is so popular, is you can do so much stuff with Lee Sin, where it's just like, that felt awesome. I did a thing, and it worked out, and I got a kill, and my team loves me. Like, that's really good and really important. So in the new jungle, it was like, okay, cool, let's add decision-making around smite. So pretty much at most every minute, you're making a decision around smite, and I think it's more often than that, because you'll get back to your Gromp, and you're like, crap, I really wanted that poison armor. I don't have smite. Oh, wait, I'm learning something. I should reserve my smite for this, and I'm improving my. So it's all about how much of a mastery loop and a mastery curve can we put in the jungle that is not about where to gank, when to gank, and how to gank.
Well, and at the same time, too, I can see, and I've talked about this before, that the pressure that really good junglers are going to be able to apply on like a journeyman jungler that just they got stuck with the role, at least in a solo queue sense, you're going to see people get smashed just because they don't
I've seen so
have
many
the
more
knowledge.
people die out of this jungle than I have since I was like level 15.
Yeah.
It's much closer to the I'm playing mid lane and I have no idea mid lane against an Akali, and it's like, please just let me farm under my tower. Like, that's the variance is a thing. Like, we wanted to bring that to the jungle. Like, there is supposed to be a failure case here.
It's gotten really safe over the last couple seasons.
Yeah, and
that's true.
Yeah.
So, like, and I mean, one of the things in previous seasons, the comeback experience was so generous. If you got put down in the jungle, it's like 2 or 3 clears and you're most of the way back caught up because of rubber banding experience was so good. And so there was that kind of thing where the requirement in the jungle, the risk in the jungle was so much lower in some ways than in lanes. And obviously, I mean, that's not to say there was no risk in the jungle. Obviously, you could win or lose in the jungle, but we wanted to make that a bit sharper.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, but on the topic of jungle complexity and the jungle camps, I was curious about how you decided on the current jungle camp buff options. It seems like, yeah, was there a balance involved there? You've got 2 buffs that seem to help you clear the jungle, and then 1 to take away vision and 1 to add vision.
Side,
so was there a balance you were going for? And were there some like crazy jungle camp buffs that were really cool, but that just didn't really fit and didn't make it into the game?
What's a good one?
So I think Krugs for a long time had a thing that was kind of like Targon's, where if you were trying to kill monsters and they got below a certain health threshold, you would one-shot them. Except it was turning them to stone. It was sort of like a Gift of Stone theme thing going on, and you'd shatter them and get a bunch of extra money.
Yeah, Grom, the big toad, used to give you a buff that gave you like little mushrooms that like you could walk to an ally and give them armor and magic resistance for a short period of time.
So yeah.
Oh.
Bring gifts for you.
Gifts of the frog.
The gifts of the frog.
So there's that kind of stuff. I think one of the ones that was actually extremely cool, we basically, you had to do it. There were no options. So we had a thing with Krugs where every time you would smite them, the camp would permanently increase in gold value.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That is some really cool gameplay. It was really high risk, high reward. If you counter jungle their Krugs, you didn't really want to smite them because you'd permanently add value, but then their jungler could come along and take it from you. Right. If you were stacking your own Krugs and they came and stole them, you were really mad. Like, it was really cool, but permanently stacking gold just became a thing you had to do as a jungler. It actually reduced a lot of choice. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's one where the design was really fun. It led to some really cool decisions, but it just didn't work in an ecosystem where we're like, okay, cool, we want you to go do these other things. Unless we made it the value just trivial and then nobody cared. It felt really hard to put in that ecosystem where people would
forced to pay attention to that timer.
It would either do it forever and always or never do it. So like we ended up
took away the diversity that you were trying to achieve.
So to get back to your the question about how do we actually land on a lot of these, like the bonuses, one of the big things that we wanted to go for was thematic clarity. Like when you go and fight a poison frog, if you were to imagine Smite as a way of sucking their power before you fight it, like poison armor kissing a frog and it retaliating was definitely something that comes to mind. Sort of help with like understanding like what these camps do and what are these powers, and not just some random sort of collection of bonuses that I think players they don't mind as long as it's a bonus, but if it made sense too and there was like, you know, obvious ways to utilize it and to counter it, that would actually be more of a win for us. As far as like the types of bonuses being sort of like, you know, you'd have like a vision granter or a vision destroyer, you know, reactive armor, reactive damage armor, and like, you know, auto attack stunning the minions. We wanted to offer like, this is actually the right time to offer a whole bunch of different mechanics to preseason to just sort of see like, you know, where can we go with this? Like, what are some of the things that we can do? And if we offer players a whole bunch of tools, like how would they actually choose which ones to affect their gameplay experience? Which ones do they actually want to do to help their sort of strategy? And there's all sorts of different like things that they can do in order to like counter jungle, or for this particular jungle style, they want to get this buff or that buff. And then that sort of like diversity experience is really the goal there.
Well, we had spoke earlier about allowing players to really work with the game and find their own strategies, you know, and figure out how they want to play the game themselves. And something that a lot of people have been playing with is Smite, not out of the jungle, in lanes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys are aware of that. And I think, and you know, personally, I think there is somewhere some 5-man strategy that makes it work, but obviously without the addition of combat stats given to the jungle items up until I think you got to spend like 2,000 gold to get some combat stats.
I think 2,200 total.
It's right around 2,200, 2,250.
But I'm sure that was a design thought because of, what was it, season 3 that we saw a lot of people taking the new jungle items, early season 4. Was that something that came up, you know, in the meeting, something that we've been really talking about, but still allowing players to use the Smite?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussions about how do we keep the jungle buffs, the jungle items from being dominant in lane. So overall, like if somebody works out a really cool way to leverage smite in a lane, and it's like, okay, if I take smite and I go into Skirmisher's Saber, and that's enough of a combat summoner that it's valuable, and I can survive my lane that long, and it's a strat that you can opt into and isn't just what you must do to succeed in lane, that's fine. Like, I don't think that's actually a problem.
If you see it sometimes, not every single time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the more sort of clearer way to say that. It's like, as long as it's a sometimes thing, it's okay. If it becomes totally dominant, we're like, okay, this isn't working out, and we'll take action as necessary on that. But like, I've seen a couple of Reddit posts where it's like, holy crap, Warwick's running smite in top lane, and aside from the Warwick part of that, I'm like, all right, cool, let's see what happens with that.
Right. The Warwick part of that.
Of course, Warwick could take smite.
Yeah,
no matter where he is.
So with Warwick right now, like, if taking smite on Warwick in top lane says that you have a really large advantage in top lane, I'm not, aside from the general problem of what we talked about earlier, where Warwick has ridiculous synergy through all these on-hit items, aside from that problem, which I think doesn't matter where Warwick goes, I'm not actually that concerned about it. I don't think it's a huge problem until we start seeing, okay, only champions who can run smite are viable top lane, and then it's going to be like, okay, wait a minute, let's deal with that.
About support with smite in order to enable chilling smite to support ganks becomes too dominant in the meta. That would actually be a problem. But as Greg was saying, as long as we see it sometimes, and it's like, there's a diversity of experiences that are fun for both sides. That's the key there. Like, for instance, one thing we actually have talked about was, what if there were actually two junglers, and one of the junglers was actually more focused around counter jungling, because the item space that they're working with allows them to function really well in the enemy jungler, and the enemy jungler say 50% of the time. That might be all right. Now, that might not be fun for the enemy team, and that's something that we'll have to evaluate. But that's something that, in terms of what is possible, something that might happen that we've talked about that we would be cool with.
So Khoopa is cool with the Blitz Star duo season 2 jungle that terrorized solo queue.
I doubt those two champions would have that great time early on in a jungle at any point.
Well, and also,
or Blitzcrank in the jungle, that's actually a great example where it's like, if those guys function in the jungle, that's all you need. The gank power that comes from either of those is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Alistar in the jungle basically being, by the way, I have Malphite ult at level 2 is probably not okay in his current kit. That's really scary unless it comes with significant trade-offs elsewhere. So those guys are where we need to watch it.
Yeah, in top lane, let's say, I can see right now, smite, I can see it as an option, Warwick top, like we were discussing with smite, because you want to get that skirmisher saber and synergize with that. But then you have to worry about, every time you go to top lane, if your opponent has teleport, they've got more threat at the dragon, which is now more of an important objective to control. So there's give and take with the other summoner spells
coming in there, and you don't have extra armor, you don't have extra magic resist, you don't have extra damage, whatever it may be.
You don't have extra damage till you finish the item.
So as long as there's that choice, there's that trade-off choice with your summoner spells, I don't think it's going to be too big of a problem.
Now moving this into, so right now when you smite a camp, you get the buff from that camp. You don't have to kill the camp, you just have to smite it. And this kind of goes with mid laners. I would think mid laners right now would be the people that are going to take smite. If they take it at all and it's a strategy out of it, why are we not killing the minions to get the buffs?
So that was actually just entirely a clarity and understandability change. So early on in testing, it actually was basically you smite the buff, and it added a
kill me,
a jungler only reward, sort of like blue or red, but it went to whoever smited the buff, and it ended up creating just these really weird, because we already have the paradigm of last hitting for a buff on red or blue. So the fact that you could walk up, smite blue, somebody would last hit blue and they'd get one buff, but the person who didn't last hit it would get another buff, started creating this really muddy scenario where nobody really knew how it worked. A lot of our playtesters, even though they were very familiar with the changes, were really reluctant to give up their blue buff because they thought the mana restore reward was going to go to whoever last hit it, not them, even though they smited it. It just got really sort of weird because our game has so often taught last hit gets you reward. So rather than overload that mechanic, we decided to create a new one, which was smite gives you an instant reward, to just totally divest those and keep them clear and separate mechanics. And overall, originally we were very concerned. What about like drive-by, you smite the thing and you get a reward and you don't clear? What happens if top laners just go and smite Grump and then go to lane with poison armor? Is that okay? And mostly, a lot of those, while we need to be aware of them, none of them had really panned out as being deal-breaking given the clarity gain we got out of the change.
I like the fact that you don't have to kill it. I'm sorry. I was going to say the fact you don't have to kill it open up some more variety for junglers as well. I could start red with a mana-hungry jungler, and when I get to blue, I can smite it and get mana enough to kill the blue buff.
Yep.
So I like that.
So, we're going to move away from the jungle a little bit here, kind of go a couple other questions. So we've had a large change with health and mana regeneration in the Rift, and now you have your base, and your base is buffed based on the items that you receive. But with that, we've seen changes to like Athene's and how much mana regeneration it gives. How actively are we watching mana regeneration in mid lane and watching the champs that are very mana dependent? Are we going to see changes to those items, in the future as obviously the patch continues to be monitored?
Yeah, so our work with like mana regeneration is not done. Like one of the things, like the main goal of the chalice / Grail, Grail is it? I don't believe Grail. Anyway, the change, so that change was to make it so that like buying your way out of mana starved situations wasn't like, buying this one item and that was it. We wanted there to be more interaction between like your item build, so it wasn't so binary if you have it or you don't. It also creates like interesting synergies with like Tear of the Goddess and other like sort of mana augmenting sort of items. But as far as like how it actually affects the game and the kinds of now mana characters are too starved in the beginning. We're watching out for that. And in fact, like that was actually, there was a late game, very late in the development cycles process, like a change to Doran's Ring to actually add back some of like strictly just mana regeneration instead of like percentage mana regeneration that you saw on like all of the other items. So like that was something that, we haven't completely finished all of our changes there, but we'll watch out.
Because there's an obvious ebb and flow to any of the lanes based on if the champions have mana or what they use for resource to cast an ability. And we have seen a lot of the champions that are resourceless, Rumble, Zed, for example, are very powerful, and they still tend to be very powerful. I guess the same kind of question. Are you monitoring that as well with the mana regeneration? Could we see nerfs coming to the resourceless champions?
Yeah, so I don't think we ever actually just want to, like, especially in the context of, like, how they match up against mana users, like, we don't want to just nerf them for the sake of, like, hey, the mana guys are actually starved for mana at some point. Let's make sure that you resourceless guys who are constantly at, like, always able, that are more cooldown dependent, like, you guys need to be weaker as a result. Like, we just wanted to, like, if anything, like, having, like, the chalice change being, like, you get low on mana and your mana regeneration like spikes, and now you're able to cast more spells. It's actually more of like the strategic sort of play pattern that we want to see, as opposed to the more sustained damage pattern that like Rumble and the mana-less champions are currently using.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you guys try to take anything over really.
Where are we at? We're at the balancing?
We have one here. Pick and ban phase was what we can move into. So a while ago, Morello had made a comment that pick and ban phase is being looked at for an update moving to Season 5. He did say these plans in it, including upping the number of picks or bans. Is there any insight you can give us in the possibilities that are currently being explored?
I mean, right now we're just in the space of exploring what we can do and what the right solution is for the game. We worry that players get shut out from actually playing the champions they want, and we also worry about using pick as an additional ban. Overall, just it pushes, particularly at the high levels of esports, players to playing a lot of generalists because they can't really specialize in the champion they're kind of known for. There's a lot of problems with it. We don't have like, here is the ultimate solution right here, ready to go. It's the kind of thing we might experiment with a little bit. Particularly, we've talked about maybe something we could try for All-Stars or something we could try for Challenger tier. But I wouldn't hold my breath for like a massive change coming, next patch or anything like that. It's more of an acknowledgement. We're not happy with the current design. We think there's something better out there. We're trying to solve it.
Is it a worry of Riot? Because right now a lot of people scream that the Dota 2 ban style is the ban way to go, where there's a pick and ban phase and an alternates and everything. And I'm sure you guys have had that conversation 100 times or heard about it. Is that being looked at? Is that something that we could see in the future, or is it trademarked by Valve and Dota?
Oh no, it's not.
I think that one was on the list, and I can't remember.
So basically, it's how different the games are. So Dota very much is about forming a team-wide strategy and actually putting together a very cohesive, very, very sharp identity as a team and what you're trying to achieve.
It could be shut down with a single ban choice.
And whereas I would actually argue we're living on another end of a spectrum where we tend to see much less differentiation between comps. Like, the whole point here is strategic diversity. We've talked about that over and over again. So if we're basically saying, hey, we're having trouble with seeing enough very sharp, very composed strategies and team compositions coming in, going to a pick and ban system that is designed to help control a game where those are so sharp you can literally win in champion select, it's actually kind of the wrong direction for what we need right now. It's meant to control a problem where we are on a completely different end of that spectrum.
Okay. You know what? Why don't you take this, Declaw, and we'll talk a little bit about champions, and we're at the end of it.
Right. Okay, we have a question here. Of the last 20 champions released by, actually, I'm sorry, we're going to discuss that one. What's the plan for the rate of champion releases, both short-term and long-term? Will champion releases continue at the rate it is this year, or will they lower each year? 2014 had 5 champs compared to
and today we had a YouTube video, right?
The teaser trailer.
It's not
that awesome trailer.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a goal to lower the release of champions. I think for a while we were worried that we were causing too much churn in the game to constantly throw new champions every patch at players. They just kind of learn how to play the game, and then now there's a new champion, and it's super disruptive. But looking over the data from last year, which is a pretty small number of champions, I'm not sure we really saw a benefit to doing that. If anything, it probably hurts things like strategic diversity when players can kind of solve okay, this champion's good, this champion's not good, now we know what to do. I think overall we would like to do more champions. It's probably going to take a little while to kind of get back up to a quick speed again. I don't know if we'll ever get back to 2011 champions.
Oh, yeah.
Please don't. My wallet didn't like it.
I'm sure that's
period after Braum and after Gnar that we kind of would like to not see again, but we work until we're done and then we ship something, so it's hard to just stick to a schedule. If you do that, you get crappier champions.
Do you think it'll be easier to release more champions now that you don't have to tweak the pace of the game on the champion level? You have your levers in other places.
I mean, that's really the hope, is that by giving ourselves ways to support more strategies, we don't have to say, okay, if we release a new ADC and that ADC can't compete with, I don't know, Tristan Kog'Maw, no one's going to play that champion, that they'll be like, yeah, but they're really good in this situation. So
right.
I think I guess it's entirely possible, though, that a new champion comes out overtuned or undertuned at what they're supposed to do. I think if we do a good job of releasing champions with some of the strategic potential in mind, if you look at Ashe, for example, as an AD carry, you don't see her competitively that much, but I don't need to tell you very much about Ashe's kit before you're like, oh, I'm probably always going to have a reason that I at least want to consider her. I'm like, by the way, she's got a global skill shot that stuns people. It's like, okay. I don't really need to tell you very much before there's something exciting about that character, and a reason why I think she comes in and out of favor, or Twisted Fate as a mage coming out of the mid lane. We don't have to do very much to see him come in and out of meta on his own, because he's just sort of got these defining characteristics that are always interesting, almost regardless of the numbers on them. So I think if we're following that strategy as we ship more champions, even if they're a little undertuned, there's going to be reasons to pick them. In the case where they're overtuned, I mean, as I said earlier, we're not promising we're not going to nerf champions, right?
Right.
From a player point of view, I kind of view reworks as pretty close to a new champion release, and I was wondering if you guys kind of view it the same way. And
Yeah.
do you kind of space out your new champions and your reworks at the same time? I guess Scion is probably the most extreme example for rework. He's pretty much just an entirely new champion. But there are also lesser versions of where you'll just take maybe a single skill and change how it works a bit.
Cassiopeia.
So,
Right.
so when it comes to like our sort of a template, like the design philosophy for champion design, that will evolve over time, and then like how like older champions compare to that is going to vary in a lot of cases. So like Cassiopeia is like her changes are very minor, but then you look at Sion and it's like, okay, no, he probably needs to be like completely redone from the ground up, and you can sort of see like the difference in the impact that it has onto the game for those fans of those champions, and like what it means to them and what it actually means for League of Legends overall. As far as like scheduling it out so that like, you know, that we're always going at like a nice cadence of like change, I actually like rely more on like these guys to help us figure out what the schedule is, but it's definitely something that as we like evolve sort of like our champion update team, it's something that it's like, hey, these guys are actually in some cases doing more work than like just creating like some of the small little tweaks, and like how do you sort of consider that when from a product development strategy?
Yeah.
It's actually been a fun problem to have like this last year where we have so much content coming out. I'm not trying to brag about that. It's just a good situation of like, oh, we need to talk about Summoner's Rift. Oh, we need to talk about all these preseason changes. Oh, we do a bunch of champions coming out. Oh, we've got these featured game modes. Oh, the Scion rework is so big that we need to, you know, put a little oomph into it and not just slip it into a patch note. So on the kind of publishing side, just letting players know what changes are coming up, we have had to figure out like, how are we going to talk about all this? Because every patch has something big in it. We want all those
multiple big things.
Or multiple big things.
Let's get a preseason in the same patch because of this.
Oh, and then Summoner's Rift got updated too. Oh,
Right.
and then
Right.
it's
Yep.
like
A brand new game.
a holiday event, which I don't know if we have the name
Yeah, no,
publicized yet.
Wow.
Yeah, I won't say anything, so I don't get
so
fired.
yeah, I mean, so I saw it on Reddit today. Like some of the Poro stuff is starting to come out. People are seeing the skins, some of the summoner icons, some of the assets that are being mined out of PvE. Like, whoops. No, that's being mined out of PvE. Like that stuff's becoming public. Like there's content coming down the pipe. Like there's the champion trailer you guys mentioned. Like it's been a lot of stuff. I mean, the guy who's in charge of helping us out with publishing, he definitely didn't have an easy job doing preseason and all the related events.
Coming from a podcast standpoint, we still haven't made it all the way through patch 4.20, and we spent 2 episodes on it. If you could not release a patch that is that large again, but it does, you know, give us a lot of content. It's a lot to talk about because I could spend another 20-30 minutes,
It's exciting,
you know, mining your guys' ears for jungle changes and why we did this, why we did that. But you know, we're just trying to hit the main things. Going to the last point here, I'm going to let DeClaw ask the question, but also for Ghostcrawler, this is going to move into something I'd like to talk to you about later. I really want to get to people from the player behavior team on the podcast at some point to talk about player behavior, and I guess with that we'll end the podcast with this last question.
Okay. Yeah, I had a concern. Today, the end of game gifting was now available, which is nice. Do you anticipate players offering bribes for other players to throw games? Like, let us win and I'll give you each a skin. And how would you deal with that?
It's my promos. I want to win it. I'm going to be diamond.
Right. Oh, it's my promos. I swear I'll give everybody a skin.
Buy your way to the top.
Just throw the game. I'm really concerned about that happening.
So,
because you can always offer that anyway. You don't necessarily need like an in-game method to streamline that process. Like,
also,
I'll pay you money for throwing the game. Send me your PayPal.
So
this makes it a little easier.
We should get Jeff or somebody on this at some point.
Yeah,
but I was still involved with the player behavior stuff when that system was first like kicking around on a piece of paper somewhere. And one of the things was because there's no way to sort of form that contract. Like I can say that all I want,
Right.
but I mean, there's no guarantee that I do anything about it.
Right.
There is some protection there where it's just like, oh, I'm going to give everybody a present. Please just trust me and do a bunch of stuff that's really bad for you and your teammates. I think it's probably going to be a hard sell in a lot of cases. Across all games ever, maybe.
Is that a legitimate? Is that something I could report my teammates for?
Right.
And do we know if it's a bannable offense? Is a punishable offense?
I don't know if we as a company have decided yet.
Yeah, I just using that as a segue, we should get Light or somebody on this at some point.
Okay.
I'm too out of touch to want to get too deep into that.
Oh, that's fine. I understand.
Shipping lots of things. It's hard to stay in tune with every feature coming out.
It's totally not possible.
No, I knew you guys weren't, going to be able to completely answer that, and that's why I precursed the question with I'd like to get, Light or somebody from the player behavior team on here in the near future to really discuss that, all the new initiatives that are happening. I think that is another piece that doesn't get enough publicity compared to the new Summoner's Rift and the new jungle changes. Like, there are things going on at Riot that are helpful. But unless you guys, I'm going to look at anybody else in the podcast here. Does anyone else have any other questions for the guys, or do you have anything that, you feel like as developers here?
I mean, give us your feedback. Keep posting on Reddit, keep posting on our forums. We want to see what people are thinking on this. We're running surveys, we're collecting all sorts of data. Nothing in the game is final. We're getting more and more confident that the general shape of what we've done is good for the game, but we need to figure out how to tune it. Also, and keep showing us more about the game. We're constantly learning about, one of the happiest moments I had after preseason was a bunch of people theory crafting on, this new Raptor smite buff is really strong. What should we do? And so we said, just plunk a ward in their Raptor buff, and then as soon as they smite it, that is triggered.
That's what I did.
So a bunch of people came up and like, oh my god, this totally undoes everything. I'm like, no, that's great. Cool. Do that. That sounds really fun.
Yep.
And give it a quick look over. You're like, all right, you're spending 75 gold. They're gonna get the reward out of it. They get a little bit foiled. It's kind of fun. I'm like, sweet. I don't think we tested that ever internally. I don't think that we thought of that. And the fact that that's happening and it's getting up on Reddit is great. So just please keep doing that.
And we have more stuff coming. As I said earlier, the main thing we want is to have more player-driven stories. We're not trying to edge out all of the jagged parts of our game. Some of it in the game is actually good because it creates really fun and exciting moments. And that's actually, I think, the key to sort of having really fun play experiences.
And I'd just like to say, I just wanted to give some kudos to the team. It's easy for designers to take lots of credit for great ideas, but it takes so many people to ship something like this, and artists and engineers don't always get enough recognition, and certainly all the players that gave us a ton of feedback on beta and now that it's live. That's really what helps League stay as awesome as it is.
Well, you're welcome. We're the people on that front line trying to take care of it, making sure people understand how to play it forward. So
anytime, guys.
we will take it and say you're welcome whatever on behalf of them. So I think that will wrap up this episode of the Trinity Force podcast. If you're out there in Twitch land, thank you so much for watching tonight. Otherwise, check out the VODs, check out whatever you need. And again, thank you guys, Numeral, Khoopa, Ghostcrawler, for all joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, a lot of fun as always.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and discussing with our listeners. It just
really appreciate it.
It just shows, the involvement in the community is excellent. One reason I keep coming back to League of Legends, for one, you keep changing things and making it more entertaining. So it's not like an old game that you shelf.
They're keeping us employed too.
Employed.
I'm going to say one last thing. This is just a podcast-related note, since this is the only night I can say it. This is the only podcast this week, so if you're listening to the MP3, I apologize. Thanksgiving, please give thanks to Riot and everybody else on the boards, and we will see you all next Monday. Guys, that is it. Peace.
Bye, guys.
See you.